There are moments when science stops feeling like a search for truth and starts to look like a horror script with a grant attached. Laboratories become prisons, hospitals turn into stages, and human minds and bodies are pushed past the breaking point in the name of progress. Tonight, we're wandering through that uneasy borderland where research crosses an invisible line. Every story you'll hear is tied to experiments that went too far. Here's how TruLies works. You're about to hear 7 stories, each one about an experiment that pushed ethics or logic past the edge. Some happened in famous institutions, others in forgotten wards, and a few may never have happened at all. 4 of these stories are drawn from real-world records, investigations, and historical accounts. 3 are completely fictional, crafted to sit right beside the truth. Your job is to decide which is which. Keep score, lock in your guesses, and comment your final tally before you watch the reveal. At least one of your instincts will betray you. And whatever you do, don't peek ahead. Tonight's journey unfolds in 7 chapters, each one a different kind of experiment under pressure. Some will sound too monstrous to be real, others almost boring in their simplicity, until you hear what happened inside the walls. As you listen, let your gut react. Which feel documented, which feel designed. Hold those first impressions tight. By the end, you might not trust them anymore. Let's open the file on Story 1, where an ordinary academic setup spirals into something far darker than anyone planned. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo turned a quiet Stanford basement into a fake prison, asking a chilling question. What happens when ordinary students are given power or stripped of it? 24 healthy male college students were randomly assigned as guards or prisoners. No criminal records, no real officers, just kids playing roles that were about to feel terrifyingly real. Local police dramatically arrested the prisoners at home, handcuffed and blindfolded them, then delivered them to campus, where they were stripped, sprayed, numbered, and chained at the ankle like actual inmates. The guards put on uniforms, carried batons they weren't supposed to use, hid behind mirrored sunglasses, and were told to maintain order however they liked. No clear script, just broad authority. Within a day, a small prisoner rebellion, pushed beds against doors, shouted back, was crushed as guards blasted in, yelled orders, imposed push-ups, stress positions, and endless 2 a.m. roll calls. To break solidarity, guards created a privilege cell with better food and beds, turned meals and bathroom trips into rewards, and humiliated others with insults, chants, and even cleaning toilets barehanded. Under constant harassment, hunger, and sleep loss, prisoners began to crack. One broke down sobbing and screaming that he was trapped, begging to leave a study he had technically volunteered to quit. Zimbardo, acting as prison superintendent, focused on keeping the prison running, blurring scientist and role player, as more prisoners showed rashes, tears, and vacant stares that looked less like acting and more like trauma. On day 6, graduate student Christina Maslock walked into the basement, saw exhausted prisoners mocked by swaggering guards, and demanded, "How can you call this science while people are suffering?" Shocked back into reality, Zimbardo shut the experiment down, leaving a haunting legacy. In just 6 days, a fake prison showed how quickly power, roles, and anonymity can push ordinary people toward cruelty and collapse. Reset your expectations. Story 2 trades cells and chains for pillows and tape loops inside the human mind. In the late 1950s, in a quiet wing of Montreal's Royal Victoria Hospital, the Allen Memorial Institute looked like any ordinary psychiatric clinic, promising modern treatment and relief to people struggling with anxiety, depression, and everyday emotional pain. A young parent checks in, expecting talk therapy and medication, reassured by white coats and calm hallways, signing forms full of medical jargon that never truly explain what is about to happen behind those closed doors. Instead of regular therapy, they are wheeled into a dim sleep room, injected with powerful sedatives, and slowly sink into a heavy drugged fog where days and nights begin to blur into one another. Hidden inside the pillow, a speaker clicks on, and a taped voice begins to repeat the same sentences over and over, sometimes soothing, sometimes cruel, like, "Your mother never loved you," echoing thousands of times into their half-conscious mind. Nurses turn the patient, feed them, and change the sheets as if caring for someone in a coma. While the room stays dark, the drugs keep flowing, and the looping messages never stop for weeks, even months. Many patients are also blasted with massive electroconvulsive shocks and given experimental drugs, including LSD, as psychiatrist Dr. Ewan Cameron tries to wipe their personalities in a process he chillingly calls de-patterning. When the sedation finally ends, families rush in with hope, only to find their loved one staring blankly, unable to recognize faces, struggling to speak, or having forgotten how to read, cook, or even use the bathroom. People who once held jobs and raised children must now relearn basic skills like counting money or tying their shoes, while huge pieces of their memories feel scrambled, missing, or replaced by a strange, childlike confusion. Years later, declassified files reveal that Cameron's radical psychic driving was partly funded through a CIA front linked to Project MK-Ultra, a secret Cold War program obsessed with mind control, carried out in a Canadian hospital without real informed consent. Survivors and families launch lawsuits and demand answers, forcing governments and universities to confront that this was not healing but non-consensual human experimentation, proof that even trusted institutions can cross terrifying lines when power, fear, and secrecy go unchecked. For Story 3, we leave human subjects behind and discover how cruelty can still stare back with almost human eyes. In the 1960s, inside a quiet Wisconsin lab, psychologist Harry Harlow set out to do something unthinkable: build a machine that could create pure despair in the minds of baby monkeys. Harlow was already famous and controversial for showing that infant monkeys preferred soft cloth mothers over wire ones that gave food, proving that love and touch are basic needs, not luxuries. But after losing his wife and battling his own depression and alcoholism, Harlow's questions grew darker. What exactly is depression, and could he manufacture it on purpose in the lab? He designed a tall stainless steel box with sloping walls and a grid floor. No toys, no faces, no way to climb out. A device he chillingly nicknamed the Pit of Despair. Tiny rhesus monkeys, only weeks old and wired for touch and comfort, were placed alone inside. At first they screamed, clawed the smooth walls, and searched desperately for any sign of life. Days turned into weeks. Many stopped exploring, some stopped eating properly, and others curled into a corner, backs turned, rocking for hours in eerie, silent echoes of human clinical depression. When the pit doors finally opened, some monkeys froze and stared into space. Others panicked at any approach, and a few began biting their own bodies, as if they no longer knew how to be alive. As adults, the most damaged females were forcibly impregnated. Some ignored their newborns completely, while others crushed, bit, or even killed them. Motherhood itself broken by manufactured isolation. Harlow openly wrote that his goal was to create helplessness and hopelessness, and claimed success, even as scientists, ethicists, and animal welfare advocates recoiled at the deliberate cruelty. His work helped prove that love and connection are as vital as food, yet the Pit of Despair now stands as a stark warning, forcing us to ask, how much suffering is too high a price for knowledge? Story 4 pulls us out of the lab and into a small southern town where silence became its own experiment. For 40 years in Tuskegee, Alabama, hundreds of poor black men walked into a government clinic believing doctors would heal their bad blood, never knowing those same doctors were secretly studying how long it would take them to suffer and die. Back in 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service and the Tuskegee Institute recruited about 600 black sharecroppers, promising free checkups, hot meals, rides to the clinic, and even burial money if they joined a special medical study. Roughly 399 of the men already had syphilis, and 201 did not. But no one clearly told them the word syphilis, only the familiar phrase, bad blood, which sounded like a simple problem the government was finally helping them fix. Instead of real treatment, the men received sugar pills, vitamins, and fake tonics, while white doctors calmly wrote notes, took blood, and watched the disease slowly attack their patients' hearts, nerves, eyes, and brains. By the mid-1940s, penicillin had become a cheap, widely available cure for syphilis, yet the Tuskegee researchers hid this news, quietly choosing to keep the men sick so their experiment would not be spoiled by anyone getting better. They even warned local physicians not to treat the men and contacted the military to block them from receiving penicillin during draft physicals, placing scientific curiosity above human life every time a chance to help appeared. As years passed, some men went blind, Some became paralyzed or hallucinated as syphilis ate into their brains. Wives and girlfriends were infected without warning, and children were born with painful, lifelong disabilities, all carefully recorded in cold medical language. In the 1960s, a young public health service employee named Peter Buxton learned the truth, filed complaints that went nowhere, and finally leaked the story to a reporter, leading to a 1972 New York Times front page that stunned the country. Public outrage shut the study down within days, sparked a lawsuit and a settlement with lifetime medical care for victims' families, and helped create strict rules like institutional review boards and informed consent to protect people in medical research. In 1997, the US president finally apologized, calling it deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. Yet the word Tuskegee still echoes today whenever Black Americans question doctors, vaccines, or trials, proof that when trust is betrayed, the wound lasts generations. Change scenes now to Story 5, a quiet village where the most radical test happens every night, while everyone sleeps. In the late 1950s, Black government cars slid into a poor Eastern European village, promising a modern sleep efficiency program that would heal exhaustion, ease work, and quietly turn this forgotten place into a model of productivity. Technicians upgraded homes with new wiring, mattresses, and medical-grade pillows, secretly hiding ultrasonic emitters in bedroom walls and metal bed frames that would trigger only when villagers slipped into the dreaming phase of REM sleep. Nights turned thick and black. Children stopped rushing in with wild dream stories. Adults realized they no longer remembered even fragments, and mornings felt heavier, as if everyone had fallen into a deep, empty hole instead of true rest. Personality slowly warped. Old friends sat in tense silence at the tavern. The jovial butcher began bolting his door in daylight, and the once gentle schoolteacher snapped cruelly at children over the smallest mistakes. As months passed without dreams, villagers felt watched. Shadowy figures lingered in doorways at night, voices whispered names from empty hallways, and some heard sobbing children or murmurs in unknown languages bleeding from inside their walls. The researchers, expecting only mild fatigue, carefully logged escalating paranoia, fraying marriages, and waking hallucinations, turning the village into a closed living laboratory of REM deprivation and its unraveling of human minds. Then came the suicides. A widower who slept by his front door to escape an unseen presence in his bedroom. A beloved young singer who said nights were just black holes that returned her more broken each morning. As deaths mounted and fear swallowed the streets, officials abruptly ordered the project shut down. Crews rushed back to rip emitters from walls, blaming everything on faulty heaters and filing the experiment away as inconclusive rural stress factors. With the devices gone, dreams crept back in jagged flashes, floating barn roofs, impossible clocks, and soon, villagers woke shaking from vivid visions where the familiar shadow figures stepped forward and quietly asked, "Do you remember me?" Rumors of a village that forgot how to dream spread like a ghost story, leaving one haunting idea behind. Without dreams to soften our fears and heal our memories, even ordinary nights can fill with shadows that refuse to stay in the dark. Story 6 brings the experiment home, turning a simple childhood punishment into something clinical, controlled, and deeply unsettling. In the early 1970s, at a quiet Midwestern university, a small team of psychologists promised parents a new scientific way to discipline children, one that would avoid spanking, shouting, and all the guilt that came with them. They told parents to build tiny timeout rooms at home. Blank white walls, no windows, no toys, just a thin mattress on the floor and a door that locked from the outside. Parents were given strict rules: 5 minutes for the first misbehavior, 15 for the next, then 30, then an hour or more, no matter how hard the child cried, begged, or pounded on the door. Every week, parents reported their results over recorded phone calls, calmly reciting numbers of timeouts and minutes served, while grad students took notes and encouraged them to stay consistent and firm. At first, the data sounded like success. Tantrums got shorter, bedtime smoother, little voices quieter, and researchers congratulated themselves that the white rooms were working exactly as planned. Then the stories darkened. A boy who followed every rule but no longer met his mother's eyes. A girl who whispered for hours after being released. Children who seemed eerily polite but rarely laughed or reached out for hugs. One father watched his 4-year-old line up toys in perfect trembling rows after an hour in the room, the child freezing if anything moved and whispering, "Don't make me go back," as if the walls were still closing in. The lead researcher brushed off these reports as a temporary shaping of affect, insisting parents trust the science, even as some children grew more robotic, more distant, and more afraid of the door than of any misbehavior. Then, without warning, the project simply unraveled. The lead researcher resigned, consent forms and recordings went missing, files turned up half-labeled or empty, and the university quietly blamed record-keeping irregularities. Timeout softened into open doors and short breaks, the field slowly embraced gentler parenting, and the brutal white rooms slipped into rumor, leaving us to wonder what really happened to the children whose silence never made it into print. And finally, Story 7 locks us in a ward of reflections, where the test subject might be the person in the glass, or the one watching. They called it Ward C, a locked hallway in a crumbling state psychiatric hospital in the Northeast, where overcrowded rooms, humming fluorescent lights, and whispered rumors filled the spaces official paperwork refused to describe. In the late 1960s, while psychiatry tested everything from electroshock to sensory deprivation, a small unmarked ward was quietly emptied so someone could try a new idea. Not to erase the senses, but to drown patients in their own reflection. Maintenance crews covered the walls from floor to ceiling with slightly curved mirrors, so every surface bent reality just a little, and even the patients' gowns shimmered with fine reflective threads that caught the light like scattered pieces of themselves. Hand-picked patients, those labeled treatment-resistant, often with chronic schizophrenia, were moved inside, the door locked, the fluorescent lights ordered to stay on day and night, while staff were told to speak only when absolutely necessary. Food arrived through small mirrored slots in the doors. No clock or window marked time, and at first some patients preened, laughed, or stared at the ceiling to avoid the walls, unsure whether this was treatment or punishment. After several days, one woman swore her reflection hesitated a heartbeat behind her raised hand. Another man snapped his head and clapped to test the glass, insisting his double had missed a step and was now trying to catch up. Soon, terrified patients froze mid-motion, claiming they had already sat while the figure in the mirror still stood, begging staff not to make them move in case the version trapped in the glass stayed behind and watched forever. Nurses whispered that even their own reflections sometimes seemed a fraction late, an expression wrong by a split second, yet no one wrote it down, and the only clear result was rising panic, sleeplessness, and desperate pleas to return to the regular crazy ward. When word came that state inspectors were coming, administrators panicked. Overnight, mirrors were ripped out or painted beige, shimmering gowns swapped for normal ones, and any notes mentioning a mirror project quietly disappeared into shredders and locked drawers. Years later, after deinstitutionalization shuttered the hospital, and its ruins became offices and condos, only scattered stories remained, of a ward lined with mirrors where reflections stopped obeying, and of frightened people, certain a part of them was still trapped in the glass. 7 stories. 4 were rooted in documented experiments and historical records. 3 were carefully constructed illusions, stitched together from real techniques, rumors, and fear. Maybe some that felt obvious turned out to be genuine, and the ones you were sure about slipped through your fingers. This is the moment where instinct meets evidence. Time to find out how well you can navigate the border between fact and fabrication. Story 1. The Stanford prison spiral was real. The events are preserved in university archives, researcher testimony, and decades of psychological analysis debating how far it truly went. Story 2. The MK Ultra sleep room was real. Court filings, survivor accounts, and declassified intelligence documents all point to a chilling chapter of Cold War mind control research. Story 3. The pit of despair was real. Academic papers, lab notes, and later ethical reviews confirm that these devices and their effects on primates were meticulously recorded. Story 4. The Tuskegee silent years was real. Government reports, congressional hearings, and investigative journalism laid bare a study that reshaped modern medical ethics. Story 5. The town that forgot how to dream was fictional. We built this one by amplifying real sleep research, blending conspiracy folklore with the eerie idea of a town losing its dreams. Story 6. Time out in the White Room was fictional. This story twists genuine child discipline studies and early behaviorism into a single extreme experiment that never officially existed. Story 7. The Mirror Maze Ward was fictional. Inspired by sensory deprivation research and staff legends from old hospitals, it's a crafted nightmare of reflections that stops just short of the historical record. So how many did you spot? Post your score. Tell us which verdict shocked you most, and subscribe to TruLies for more nights where reality and invention trade places.